Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy, and I'm an alcoholic. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for such good hospitality and the welcome that I've had to be here. And I really appreciate your meeting. And it's just really an honor to be here and be of service. My sobriety date is August the 30th, 1980. I'm about 44 years and 9 months sober, without a drink. It's thanks to you, all of you, and all the shoulders that I stand on over the years. And I'm here tonight to share my experience, strength, and hope, and hopefully something that I say can help inspire you to keep coming back without a drink. Welcome to the newcomers. I'm really glad you're here. I do hope you hear something tonight or feel something tonight that keeps you coming back. This is a great way of life that I didn't even know I wanted when I walked into these rooms. But I can't tell you how grateful I am that I've been spending almost all of my adult life in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm from New Orleans, and in New Orleans, if anyone's ever been, you know, it's a party town. And I loved partying. That was my big thing. I grew up in a city that drank a lot and normalized drinking a lot, in a family that drank a lot. And I thought that's what everyone did in this world. And I love to get drunk. I started drinking at 13, you know, like a lot of us do, thinking nothing of it. By 15, I was feeling the buzz every time, and I loved that buzz. I loved that warm feeling, and I just loved being drunk. I don't think my friends did drink the way I did, but I thought they did. And as life went on, you know, when I was in high school, by 17, I started having blackouts. And I was the kind of high school kid who partied with the worst of them. I could drink any boy under the table. I had a fake ID at 16. I was at belly up at the bars in the French Quarter at 16 with the fake ID. The drinking age back then was 18, so I could get away with it at 16. And I didn't think anything of it, and nobody else did either. I would come home drunk, and my parents wouldn't even notice. My dad was an alcoholic. And my mom, I guess, didn't notice that her daughter was coming in at midnight, bouncing off the walls to get to the bedroom, or cooking some crazy meal at midnight and wrecking the kitchen. But I got through high school looking pretty good. I was the kind of kid in high school who you would think didn't have any problems. I was that kid who did good in school. I was popular. I did the cheerleading thing. You know, I was the kind of kid, I got a scholarship to LSU for academics. No one thought I had any problems. I didn't even think I had any problems. So I went to college, and in college, I drank like college kids do. But I think I drank a lot more than college kids did. I would walk across campus, you know, going to frat parties, drunk out of my mind. I would started driving drunk all the time and didn't think anything of it. At 19 in college, I remember though, things got pretty dark inside my soul. I remember at 19 wanting just to crawl into that bottle and not come out. I got to the point where I stopped having fun drinking, because when I went to the bars, I always got drunk. I always blacked out. And I started losing friends. I stopped going to the social things that I went to. I stopped participating in the clubs that I was involved in. I still went to school. I still made good grades, but I decided to hang out in the bar and the bar only. And so I made the bar my home, my second home. And the bartender was my boyfriend, literally. He would sit there and I would shoot shots of tequila, drink crazy all night long, get on his motorcycle at the end of the night, no helmets, ride in a blackout all over the back roads in Louisiana. And I don't know how I'm still alive today. But by the grace of God, I didn't die during those years. But I crossed that line that they talk about, where you just start drinking to drink and the drink takes you. They say the girl takes the drink, then the drink takes the girl. And around 1920, the drink took me and took my life into some dark places. By the time I graduated from college, I was very depressed. And I had no clue what to do with life. I'm a registered nurse. I graduated as a nurse at the age of 21. And I thought, well, I have to go out into the world and get a job. So I went to Houston and I worked at this really nice hospital in a trauma ICU. And I had a prospects of a beautiful career as a nurse. I wanted to be a helicopter nurse because I had seen that on a flyer from the 70s from the Vietnam War. These nurses, flying around in the helicopter with the veterans and with the soldiers. And I wanted to be that nurse. And we had a heliport outside of our ICU. It's like one day I'm going to be on that helicopter. But that's not how things went because I was crippled by the disease of alcoholism. I would go to work a 12-hour shift, go to the bar. Go to work, go to the bar. Go to the work, go to the bar. And the bar wasn't just the bar. It was picking up the guy at the bar, spending the night wherever we spent the night, waking up the next day feeling sick of myself and doing it again. I drove drunk all the time and I didn't care. That last year of my drinking, I was in this don't care mode. I didn't care about you. I didn't care about me. I didn't care about my patients. I didn't care about anything. What I could tell, because I had been drinking so long, and those years where you're supposed to be growing up, I didn't have any adult skills. I didn't know how to deal with life on life's terms. And I thought life looked pretty dark and not worth living. At the hospital, I would make grave mistakes because my life was unmanageable internally, emotionally, and I was spiritually sick. So I'd go to work hungover and I would just not care. So I would do things to patients that hurt them, literally hurt them. And doctors would cover for me at the end. But that was going to come to an end. I was probably going to be losing my license quite soon. Narcotics would be missing from the drawer. Back then, we didn't have computers to check them out. And we would have to sign them up on a clipboard. Well, I just didn't feel like signing things out. And I just didn't feel like putting them back when you're supposed to put them back and you didn't use them. I didn't take them because I wasn't into drugs, but I was just didn't care. And I just didn't want to be bothered with the system. So I would throw them in the trash. When I left that job and went to rehab, my nurse manager told me you're about to get fired because we were documenting that you were stealing drugs. So I was about to lose my license. My job was going down the tubes. My life was already in the tubes. I was having health problems from my lifestyle. I was told that I might be infertile because of a pelvic infection from my lifestyle, and I didn't care. So what happened was August 1980, I'm 22 years old. I've decided life isn't worth living. I'm going to kill myself. And I decided my way to kill myself was to drink enough alcohol that I could drive off a bridge. Between Houston and New Orleans, there's lots of bridges. I always drove with, the 6-pack underneath my driver's seat, because drinking and driving was pretty common in those days, in those places. And I was going to drive off a bridge, and I was really okay with that. I never thought about my parents, my family, my friends, because I didn't have any relationships that were working. I had no friends. I knew loneliness like I think only an alcoholic knows loneliness, that deep sense of isolation. And I couldn't stop really doing things that were destructive to myself and others. So death seemed like the right choice. The other option I thought of, I had a friend who was a drug addict and she invited me to go live at her house. So I thought, well, maybe I'll become a drug addict. That seemed like the second best option. I wanted to be a hippie, so I thought, well, maybe I'll just become a drug addict. So September 1st, I was supposed to be moving into her house to be a drug addict or kill myself, whichever came first. And literally middle of August, I got a phone call that my boyfriend and his family were checking themselves into rehab. And I didn't even know what rehab was. I had never heard of rehab. I had never heard of recovery. In those days, we didn't talk about alcoholism anywhere. I didn't even know what alcoholism was, other than there was a AA meeting down the street of one of the houses I lived in college, and they smoked cigarettes and sat on the sidewalk. And I said, that's what alcoholism is. That's not me. They checked themselves into rehab. I went to that rehab to visit, and I actually was following my boyfriend in there because I wanted to get back to him with him. We had kind of broken up. I'm like, well, I'll just go and check it out. Maybe we'll get back together. He went through rehab. During that time, I spent a week in Family Week, and I got introduced to the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got introduced to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you guys scared the hell out of me. And I did not want anything to do with you. I thought it was revival. I thought that word God was like nothing I wanted anything to do with. I was an agnostic, if not an atheist. I didn't want anything to do with any of you or the meetings. But what I did see that was really attractive to me was the warmth and the love that you had for each other and the ability that you had to tell the truth. I had never told the truth in my life. I had never had love and that sense of warmth anywhere in my life before. I didn't grow up like that. I grew up in a family that, we didn't have that. There was too much disease for that to be there. So I got this much hope in that rehab that maybe there was something worth living for. I ended up checking myself in, but only because I had emotional problems, not because I had alcoholism. And they let me come in for emotional problems. And what happened was I sat in those groups feeling very different. So if you feel different in AA on the outside, it's okay. I was a young girl in the South when AA was mostly men, and I didn't feel like I fit in. And I felt like I was way too young to get sober. I had just turned 23 at the end of August. Right before my sobriety date. August 23rd is my belly button. August 30th is my sobriety date. I thought, I'm too young. Why do I want to be sober? That's a really scary prospect. So I was scared to get sober, but I was scared not to get sober. They told me to read the first 164 pages in that big book. Well, I didn't even know what the big book was, but I got it. They said to become honest, open-minded, and willing. Okay, I'm a little bit willing. They said, that's good enough. I read those first 164 pages and I saw myself all over those pages, which was weird because it's written by, in the 1930s by probably a bunch of men. And some of the verbiage in there seemed really odd to me and a little bit intimidating. But I could see myself, as that director of the show, always trying to tell everybody what to do. I could see myself, and all of the things they talked about with the desperation, and the bewilderments. I saw myself in that chapter on We Agnostics, which really kind of changed my life. It talks about on page 44 in We Agnostics that we were at this place in our life where we had to consider dying an alcoholic death, being doomed to death, it says, or choose a spiritual way of life. And I had to think about it because I didn't know if I wanted a spiritual way of life. I didn't even know what that meant. And I didn't believe it was even possible for me. But I kept walking the walk through those first 164 pages, through those first 30 days. And I got a little bit of hope that maybe I could do this. But they said, you don't have to want to do this for the rest of your life, Kathy. How about one day at a time? I never lived one day at a time in my life. My life was consumed with fear of the future. And that's why I wanted to kill myself before, because I looked to the future. If the future was anything like the current times, I was out. I started getting some hope that maybe the future could look a little different. So I was willing to go to any lengths. They sent young people at those days from that treatment center to halfway houses. I think it's called sober living these days. But I went to a halfway house. They sent us to as far away from home as possible. I went to Minneapolis. I'm a girl from Louisiana. A jeans jacket is the only jacket I ever owned in my life. And they sent me to Minneapolis in October. And I was thinking, winter's coming. And I had no idea, what winter was going to be all about. But I was willing to go to any lengths. I got on that plane. I went to Minneapolis. The gal from the halfway house picked me up with a sign. Here I was walking into this car, into this place. I had no clue what I was doing. But I had this sense of peace because I remember back in the treatment center, I was that girl sitting in the back of the room, like people do when they go to treatment center and they go to meetings. And they said, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking? I did raise my hand. And I walked. I remember today how it felt to walk from the back of that room to the front of that room and get my desire chip. And the warmth and the love, that was what I was holding in my heart that was possible for me. So that's why I was willing to go to any lengths. I wanted that. Got off the plane, got into the car, got to the halfway house. It was an old nunnery. And there was women there that lived there, ages 18 to in their 60s, from what I remember. We were there for 90 days. It was a 90-day program, then you were out. And it was old school. You had to push your chair in, you had to empty your plate, you had to do this, you had to do that. They taught me so much. One of the biggest lessons from that halfway house that I learned was about rigorous honesty. What does it mean to have rigorous honesty? They had this chore jar, and you had to literally do these chores, like make your bed, clean your sink, push your chair in, do this. You had to get a job, all these things. You had to go to 2 meetings a week, all the things that you had to do, but they didn't check up on you. It wasn't their responsibility whether you were doing your program or not. It was your responsibility to be true to yourself. And I learned a lesson there that I think has kept me sober all these years. I had to write myself up and put my name in a jar when I didn't do the sink, or I didn't make the bed, or I didn't push my chair in. I knew what was true for me. And that rigorous honesty has saved my life. Because whoever had the most names in the jar had to do chores on Saturday. And I had to do chores a lot. And raking the leaves in Minneapolis in the fall was one of the biggest chores. And like, I learned my lesson, but I felt so grateful that I was learning how to be honest. I was learning how to live. I was learning how to grow up and be responsible. I ended up living in Minneapolis for a year, and that year saved my life. And what I learned in Minneapolis in those old school AA meetings was that the steps are where the recovery is. My home group was a young people's Tuesday night meeting in St. Paul, which is the twin city to Minneapolis. And I walked into that meeting every Tuesday night and felt the warmth and the love of Alcoholics Anonymous. I felt at home. I was told to get a home group, get into the big book, get a sponsor, and be of service. I still believe those are the actual cores of our recovery, and I'm still doing that today. And what I learned in those steps is that as overwhelming as they are, as confused as I was, if I take it bit by bit, I can grow and I can keep growing and I can keep growing and I can keep growing. I can heal my life. I can be that channel of peace that it talks about in the 11th step. Couple of things I heard in those meetings that I like to share when I have a chance to share, because they changed my life and saved my life many times. They seem simple, but they really have saved my life. One was, to drink is to die. That hit core for me over and over. The old timers would say, don't drink, go to meetings. To drink is to die. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And those things changed my life. I realized if I did drink because of the way I drank, I could die anytime. Because I drunk all the time and I did stupid when I drank. And I never knew what was going to happen and I always blacked out. So I made a decision that first year I wanted to live. I wanted to live. One day at a time, I wanted to learn how to live. And that's what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous over and over all these years later. So I left that year after Minneapolis, went home. And as things happen in Alcoholics Anonymous when you're young, boy meets girl on AA campus, I met the boy. I didn't find a home group. I didn't, I went to meetings, but I didn't get into service because my boyfriend was an alcoholism counselor. What could go wrong? And we started an alcoholism counseling business together and moved onto the property and had this residential treatment program. But he wasn't going to meetings. I wasn't really doing meetings myself. By year 3, I was so sick. I was as sick as I ever was. And somebody knocked on my door and said, what is wrong with you? And I just started bawling. And I got back into meetings. I got a sponsor. I got a home group. There weren't a lot of young people in that small community we lived in. But I found the group that worked for me. And I started getting better. He chose not to, but we carried on. We were married for 15 years. We had 4 children together. We moved around a lot. Year 10, I ended up in Seattle. And the journey to get to Seattle went through Reno. While I was in Reno around year 7, I decided, I had 3 kids at the time. I have 5 children in sobriety, but I had 3 at that time. I didn't like the meetings in Reno. You know how you move to a new city and you don't like how they do AA? That happened to me. It's like, you guys aren't doing it right. And I went to the general office in Reno. I said, you guys aren't doing it right. And they were like, okay, keep coming back. But I decided I didn't want to come back. I decided I didn't like the steps. I don't like the big book. And I just, got that 7-year itch like you do in marriage sometimes. Like, I don't like you anymore, Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I quit going. And I moved to Seattle because that's where we moved next. And I was in Seattle having my 4th baby. And my husband was out of town. I went to the doctor on a Friday and I found out that baby had passed. Here I am pregnant with this baby. I have 3 young children. My husband's out of town. They told me I had to wait till Monday to deliver the baby. I sat there in my house that Friday night, disconnected from Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no family because I'm not close to my family and I've never lived near them. And I was alone with so much pain that I made a decision, I'm going to drink. I don't care about recovery. I don't care about anything else. I have to drink. I can't live with this pain. But one thing I had learned early on that did work for me that night was not to keep alcohol in my house. I didn't have any alcohol in the house. My kids were little, they were in bed. I had to wake them up, put them in the car, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. And a big light bulb went on top of my head. I think God intervened and said, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And I had to sit there and think, are you an alcoholic? And I had to remember that first year in my foundation of my recovery, it's like, yes, I know in my innermost self, I'm an alcoholic. Okay, do you believe once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic? Yes, I do. This is the conversation I had with myself. And like, okay, you know what to do. The next morning, I called Alcoholics Anonymous. It was before we had cell phones and computers and internet. And I called teleservice. Thank you for those that do teleservice. Somebody answered the phone and I said, I need help. And they said, here's a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, a women's meeting with babysitting. And that's what I needed. I needed a babysitting meeting and I needed a fellowship of women. I walked into that meeting that Saturday morning, fell into their arms. They held me like they had known me all my life. And that's what we do for each other. We're there for you. There's no place that I've ever discovered in my adult life, in my experience, that holds people's pain and the deepest sharing that we can do as humans than Alcoholics Anonymous. We do the best with intimacy and sharing, in my opinion, and my experience. They held me, I healed slowly, and I took my pain to my recovery. That changed my life because I really realized that I need to always turn towards Alcoholics Anonymous and I need to be involved. I don't need to be an attendee sitting in the back of the room. I'm at the meeting. No, you're not really at the meeting. If you sit in the back of the room, you don't participate. Being in the meeting means being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, sitting in the middle of the room, sitting in the middle of the herd, raising your hand and being in service, having a home group and giving back. And that changed me. Because I didn't drink, and over the years, because I haven't had a drink when things really hit the fan, I have been able to turn towards God, turns towards service, turns towards Alcoholics Anonymous. And the steps over and over have saved my life. From that point on, I moved to California, not too long after that. And at this point, I have 4 children and I'm involved in service. I have a sponsor. I moved to California this time. I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I was welcoming other people when they were walking in the door. I was embracing other people when they were having painful experiences. I was showing up for people. I was a stay-at-home mom, so I got to stay home with my kids and I had plenty of time to give back, and that's what I did. But at 15 years sober, my husband decided he wanted to go back out and use. And I can tell you my experience with that was that he was one of those 2-steppers. He could talk the talk, but not walk the walk. And it says it in the 12th step, in our 12 and 12, that there are people that can say, I'm an alcoholic. And they try to help other people, which is what he did professionally. But he never worked the steps. He never had a home group. And in 20 years, he got hooked on Vicodin and he was out. He is still out. 30 years later, he's homeless on the streets of Santa Cruz. He's been homeless on the streets since that time, between San Francisco and Santa Cruz. So here I was with 4 children, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I didn't have any family around, but I had Alcoholics Anonymous. I had the women in this meeting, in the rooms. I had the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a home group. I had people to call, and I had these steps. And I can tell you having these steps transformed my life in that particular situation. The night or 2 or 3 after he left, I was so distraught and full of so much grief. I couldn't change my clothes. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. But I sat up one night after talking to my sponsor and I wrote an amends letter to this person who just left me with 4 kids. But that's something that's not normal in our society. You know, I could easily call up anybody and go, listen to what happened to me. And I would get a lot of sympathy. But I knew in my heart of hearts that I had made a decision at some point based on self that put me and my kids in a position to be hurt. So I wrote an amends letter to this man and I mailed it to him. I have no idea whether he ever read it. I have no idea whether he ever got it, but I was set free. Today's reading of the daily reflection is about freedom. And that's what these steps and this program is about, freedom. How do we get to be free? free of fear, free of an obsession to drink, number one, but free of fear, free to live a good life, free of loneliness, just free. And that night I was free of my resentment towards him. I was free of being a victim. I love him. He loves me. He talks highly of me to my kids. My kids have a great relationship with him, even though he is homeless and suffering from this disease. But they know how to love and they know how to be present with him. That's Alcoholics Anonymous acting in all of our lives today. So I continued to go on in Alcoholics Anonymous during those years, and I would say between years 15 and years 39. I went back to work. I became a labor and delivery nurse, and I got to bring the grief from my loss, my baby, into all of the delivery rooms that I got to be present for other women who lost their babies. And because of the kind of grief work we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, which for me, in my experience, is the deepest and purest form of grief work, because we're so present for each other. And because we do these fourth steps and fifth steps, we don't have any walls. We 100% give it all to each other. So I knew how to show up for these women and these men, the dads and the family members. And I can't tell you how many parents have written me letters or talked to me afterwards and said, you changed my life. Being there present for me in my darkest day, you changed my life. I just met one of those just recently this last week. I just moved back to Sacramento from where I was living in Amador County, and I have a new home group. I was there Wednesday night, and they asked me to share. So I shared my little 20-minute story, and I shared this part of my story. And one of the mothers afterwards, one of the women in the group afterwards came up to me and said, "Hey, did you ever work at such and such a hospital in Sacramento?" I said, "I did." She was, "I think you were my nurse for my delivery." I had a very difficult delivery. I didn't get to see my baby immediately, and I was in a lot of emotional pain. And you were there with me. You stayed over your shift. You sat by my bedside. You held my hand. She goes, "And I've never forgotten your face." That was 22 years ago. She just told me this last Wednesday. That's the kind of difference we can make as we work these steps and as we do this program. My first year of my sobriety, I was so self-absorbed that I couldn't function as a nurse. That was true when I was drinking, but even sober, I had a night shift job in Minneapolis, and my job was to do vital signs, the normal nurse thing. And I was just didn't want to be bothered with taking vital signs. It was too much work. That's how selfish and self-centered I was that first year of my sobriety and how immature I was. So I faked the vital signs all night. I would open the door, they looked like they're breathing, and I would just write down the vital signs. I didn't even know I was selfish and self-centered. But, I just was I didn't want to be bothered with the whole thing. So at the end of the night, 6 a.m., the lab goes in to draw everybody's blood at 6 a.m. I'm sitting there and I hear code blue, room, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, oh, that's my patient, code blue. I went in there and ran in there. I'm doing chest compressions. I'm doing mouth to mouth, and I'm dying inside because I faked her vital signs all night. I don't know how long she'd been dead. I don't know if I would have done something different and actually been her nurse, if she would have been alive today. I don't know, and I will never know. But the way I made amends to that patient and all the other patients that I didn't treat right is how I practiced nursing the last 20 years of my career. And I can tell you, at 39 years sober, I retired in 2019. And those nurses that I worked with gave me the biggest party. I was a nurse leader to many, and I taught many of them the craft of nursing and how to be a great bedside nurse. And they celebrated me. But I, on the inside, was celebrating Alcoholics Anonymous because you showed me how to be that kind of person. You showed me how to be accountable, responsible, caring, and loving. And by working these steps and being of service and showing up, I changed my character 180 at the bedside. I also can say that I raised my kids as a sober mom. They all came to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They all watched me work with steps, work with sponsees, be of service. During those years, we had a great time. It was challenging. I ended up getting married a second time to another guy I met in these rooms. And that lasted 10 years, but also didn't quite work out. They say, and I read this after the fact, but in the 12 and 12, it does say, boy meets girl at a campus, and make sure that you're emotionally, spiritually, psychologically fit and well enough that you can make a good decision about the relationship, or it will kind of blow up in your face later, which did happen for us. We tried really hard, but by 10 years, it was just really too painful to stay in that relationship. We had another child. I had a child with him, so I have 5 children. That was my 5th. But they saw me over the years in the face of difficulties in life. I worked shift work. I juggled single parenting a lot of the time. I juggled my kids' addiction. I have 3 kids that turned out to be addicts, and they watched me, situation after situation after situation, bring the best, bring love, bring perseverance, bring resilience. And they knew that I was in love with Alcoholics Anonymous the whole time. It says in the book that that's the acid test. In step 10, the 12 and 12, the acid test is, can you face anything and stay sober? Can you face anything and have emotional stability, emotional resilience? And boy, I learned I could, but it wasn't because of me. It's because I learned so much in these rooms, like the pettiness prayer, like the 11-step prayer that we have in our book, like all the prayers that are given to us, like all the ways of taking our inventory, all the things that we have to do to keep showing up and being of service. I was that kind of person. So yeah, this program teaches us to handle life on life's terms. I mean, where else can you find that? I never found that in therapy. I never found that in churches, even though I like those things and I've done those things. I didn't find those things in religion or therapy. I found them in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So 39 years sober, I retired, and I'm looking around like, now what am I going to do with my time? And I decided to be a yoga teacher. I wanted to be a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher. I was going to start this whole new business, this whole new life. Got the yoga teacher training done. I was in a year-long program for this Buddhist meditation program, and I was in Big Sur. One of our assignments was go do a silent retreat. So I'm sitting with myself, which is very difficult for the alcoholic to do, with no stimulation. And there was a couple of prompts that we were supposed to kind of do. One of the prompts was, at your time of death, and you're facing death, what do you are going to feel like that you haven't done, that you wish you would have done? And the lessons I was learning was like, live every day like today could be your last. And in that meditation, what I came to me was that I felt really good about my parenting, even though it was not perfect. I felt like I really did it the best I could. My job, best I could. Marriages, the best I could. At that point, I was married again, but not to an alcoholic. 3rd marriage. I've changed my names many times, but I've never changed my sobriety date. Yeah. So I'm realizing the one thing I felt like I hadn't done well enough was give back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Those last few years of the busy, I'm a nurse, I'm working evening shift, I can't go to evening meetings, I'm juggling kids and teenagers, and my kids some of my kids were addicts, I'm juggling all the things that you juggle, in life. I didn't really raise my hand enough. I didn't do service enough. So I made a decision to get back into Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, within a month, God gave me a sponsor at a meeting. I dusted off my big book. It was sitting on the shelf for way too long. This is my original book, by the way, with my sobriety date written in it like they told me to do. I dusted off my big book and I started working the steps. The pandemic came on and I sat there in a park with her, a young woman, and she walked me through what it really means to be sober. And that's what sponsees do. As you read this book with them and you read the 12 and 12 with them, they walk you through and remind you what it really is to work this program. She did not stay sober after that year. She went back out and decided it wasn't quite right for her. But you know what? My feet were firmly planted in the rooms and I was so happy. I found an online meeting during the pandemic. I did not ever think Zoom would work out for Alcoholics Anonymous, but boy, has it worked for me and a lot of other people around the world. And welcome to the Zoom people who are here tonight. And I'm glad this is a Zoom and hybrid meeting because I think meetings need to be accessible. I found a Zoom online meeting that became my home group, and it was actually in Marin. So I became a Marin homeliner. So I have kind of like a 2 home groups now, that one online. I still love in Fairfax. I became their GSR. So I was a GSR in Marin for 2 years, and I love general service. I dipped my toes in it way back in the day, 20 years ago when we were writing the 4th edition, and I realized that we are Alcoholics Anonymous. We are the ones that run Alcoholics Anonymous. I did not know that. We got to decide what was going into that 4th edition, and I was thrilled. So when I got to be a GSR again, I fell in love again all over with Alcoholics Anonymous and general service. And I continued on after the pandemic, became a GSR for my home group in Amador County. And I'm one of those people that's a cheerleader for Alcoholics Anonymous through general service. Some people don't like it, but if you want to try falling in love with AA on a whole different level, I recommend general service. It's awesome. You get to really be a part of the future of what Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be. Because I want this program here for my kids. I want it here for my grandkids and whoever else might need this one day. And these traditions and these concepts is what keeps it going. So it is what it is. Wherever you go to a meeting, anywhere in the world, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. I can tell you that 3 of my kids made it into these rooms and are doing quite well. My oldest, though, struggles a bit, and she's been homeless off and on and really struggling. And that's been one of the hardest things for me to deal with in my recovery. It's like watching my kids suffer from their disease, and I can't fix them. I tried. I brought them to meetings over the years. I tried to sponsor them over the years. Not really, but really. And it just didn't work. Didn't work. And I saw them stumble. But my youngest is 27, my middle is 36, and they're solidly planted in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for saving my children. My oldest is struggling, but she loves the AA, but she is struggling today. And my biggest pain has been the grandkids that have been born to her that I've lost to some degree through CPS. I still have contact with them, but it's been very difficult the last few years. And my solution to this pain was not to drink, but to get a bigger God. I was told if I have a bigger problem, get a bigger God. So I'm not grateful for my kids and their disease, but I'm really grateful that it's brought me to my knees over and over and over again. I've brought that pain to these rooms. You have embraced me, you've healed me, you've kept me sane, you've kept me sober, and that God has really come to live in my heart. And I love how it says in the big book that the central fact of my life today is that God lives in my heart in a way that is indeed miraculous. For this atheist, lonely, lost girl walking into these rooms to be this competent adult who loves God and loves bringing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous and feels like I'm so grateful that I have made it into these rooms. My family of origin, my sister and my brother, who actually went to rehab with me, but they chose not to be a part of AA, look at me today, and they are so impressed with who I've become. And they recently said to me, "You are so compassionate and kind. My dad just died, and I was like one of the compassionate, kind members of the family dealing with the family stress." And I knew in my heart that they're looking at AA. We are the face of AA wherever we go. And I always try to remember that even at the Starbucks or any place else, I'm the face of AA. I want to bring the message of Alcoholics Anonymous in every area of my life. And I feel like that's kind of my calling to do that. And I feel like that's all of our opportunities to do that as we do service. I heard someone say years ago at a conference that if you're drowning of the disease of alcoholism, we're going to get in that boat. We're going to come out and pick you up. But once we pick you up and you can sit upright, you better get aboard and start growing and go help the next suffering alcoholic. So I invite all of us to keep coming back. I feel like we are responsible, but anyone, anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA to always be there. And for that, I am responsible. I did want to share that I'm very excited about a couple of things coming up. I am going to the international conference in Vancouver, British Columbia. If anyone is not going, you can still go, or you can go online. So I invite you to do that. I have never been. I don't have a bucket list like some people my age do when they retire. I don't want to climb, any big mountain or do any big thing. But what I want to do is be a better channel of God's love. I want to be a better channel to help suffering alcoholics. That's my bucket list. and I want to go to the international conference. And I'm also going to the International Conference of Young People in AA. That's in Minneapolis in September, if anybody wants to join me. And a quick story about that is I was at a traditions study workshop a couple of weeks ago and met one of my buddies in general service who also got sober in young people's Alcoholics Anonymous. And we had talked about the conference being in Minneapolis. He said, "Are you going to go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go or not. You know, it's one of those things where it's trouble, it's money, it's this, it's that." He goes, "Didn't you get sober in Minneapolis?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Didn't you get sober with the young people in Minneapolis?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Isn't that your AA birthday?" Because he remembered when my AA birthday was in in August. I said, "Yeah." He goes, "So you're telling me that it's in Minneapolis where you got sober with young people and it's gonna be your 45th AA birthday if you stay sober?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, the universe is lining up for you. You gotta go." And he prodded me and he said, "You even need to call up your your halfway house and offer yourself to service." So that's what I did. I called them up this past week and I said, "I'm coming." I made a decision. I'm going to get on that plane and go once again to Minneapolis. And I offered myself to service to them. And my heart was so full when I did that. That's what we do for each other. We poke and we prod each other to keep each other going. But the only way that happens is if we keep showing up and we keep raising our hand. Thank you. The last thing I want to share is there's a reading in the family afterwards that I found because I was at an As-Built season meeting. I love As-Built season meetings. If you don't know, it's a little book that has a lot of Bill W.'s writings in it and excerpts from the different books that were published in Alcoholics Anonymous. But this meeting, there was a topic that I had never heard before, and it was about a reading out of that portion of the family afterwards where that gold mine of the alcoholic comes out and says, "I'm saved," or I'm well, or whatever. And he realizes that, he's only mining a mine of gold. That if he keeps mining it, he's going to, get this gold. And he can only keep it if he gives it all away. And he has to mine this gold for the rest of his life. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what it says. And I realized I found gold in these rooms. These are sacred seeds. Not everybody makes it into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and those that make it don't always stay. Those of us who have these seeds, hold on to them and keep showing up for service so that you can keep holding on to them and work these steps through, keep holding on to them. It's gold. And then we have to give it away. Give it all away and keep mining it for the rest of your life. I'm 44 years into this thing. I've been mining this thing for my whole life. I can tell you it's worth it. And then we have to give it all away. In our culture, when do we give everything we have away? Like, you don't make a bunch of money and then stand on the street corner and give it away. You don't give your car out. "Here's the keys, go drive my car." We don't think like that. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, we have to give it all away. That's how we clear the channel so we can keep showing up as these channels of peace and love and fellowship with each other. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm privileged to be here tonight. And I hope you all keep coming back. I know I will.